Good afternoon and welcome to Microsoft 365 virtual event here in Madrid. Disappointed that I'm not there in the sunshine, but of course I'm glad that everybody's safe and sound and that we're still able to make these events successful. So what are we going to do for the next 45 minutes? Well, we are going to talk about how we can ensure high-value MS Teams in an agile organization. So we're not going to get too technical in this session, but we are going to talk about some fairly advanced management and adoption techniques, and we're going to focus a lot of it around Agile. I'm sure many of you have heard, and maybe your organization is moving towards an Agile environment. So we're going to talk about some of the roles in Agile. We're going to talk about some of the methodologies in Agile and how we can apply them to MS Teams to be able to make it real value to the business. Sponsors, we could not survive without sponsors. So the one thing I want to tell you to do is that when you start thinking about working in Office 365 and you need a third-party help and assistance, then come back to this slide. Choose one of these sponsors. Tell them that you saw their logo on SharePoint Saturday Madrid, on Microsoft 365 Saturday Madrid, and that you'd like a little bit of help, please. And see what they can do. This would be their value out of their support for this event. That would be cool. So don't forget, these are the people that can give you some help. This week alone, there was over 20 new items rolling out on the roadmap that would apply some advantage to MS Teams. But even though there's 20 new items or new functionalities that are going to be added to Teams, how many of them are going to add value? So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some techniques on how we can define MS Teams as a desktop application and how we can ensure, that's an interesting word, how we can ensure value for the users. Guys, I got grey hair. I've been around a while and I've been in SharePoint and then into Office 365 since this stuff was first released. My first experience with SharePoint was something called Team Services, which was a kind of loosely web frontified version of a document library. Yeah, it seems a long time ago. Since then, I've been doing a lot of stuff, but I now focus on knowledge and collaboration consultants. I roll out Office 365. I've done 2.5 migrations. I've now nearly done 3. And I use Agile as a Scrum Master and a product owner to make this work and to add value. If you use Agile techniques to roll out MS Teams, you can do nothing else but add value. And that's the really cool stuff. How can you find me? My website, scisteve.rocks, will have access to all of my podcasts and blog items and all those kinds of things, tell you about some of the things we've done. I can be found with @scisteve, and I can be found at my podcast, office365distilled.com. And if you do Google search on any of those items, that's how you'll get to most of my social stuff and my websites. Office 365 Distilled, we've episode 34 released this week. So you can see the latest episode where we talk about governance around applications. We talk about how Microsoft are changing the languages within these applications. We talk about the release protocol and how many new features are being released and how we implement them. We drink a couple of great whiskies and taste them and tell you about them. And we have fun for an hour, and most people find it very enjoyable. It's a very relaxed podcast. You don't need to take a pen and paper and make notes. You just need to listen and laugh. Office365distilled.com. So this is what we're doing. We are looking at a way where we can ensure high value teams. So Teams means so many different things. We have MS Teams as an application, which I'm absolutely certain as soon as anybody says the word Teams to you, that's the first thing that comes to mind. And MS Teams is a technology that is leading the Office 365 story for Microsoft. It's bringing together content the same way that Outlook is bringing together emails and external communications. And then we also have the team, okay, which is people driving the technology. And that technology could be anything. It could be banking software. It could be creating cars. It could be making heavy engineering cranes that will lift a ventilator product onto the 17th floor of a high-rise building. It could be the food supply chain that is bringing everything in or out of a supermarket. It could be any kind of technology that supports any kind of business, generally is done with teams. And of course, the whole point about MS Teams is that it supports teams. Sean Geraghty, he deals with user experience with the UX part of software, came up with a great quote. The technology you use impresses no one. The experience you create with it is everything. For so long, even in my career in IT, we just throw an application out there and say, guys, this is what it does. You get some documentation, some training, and this is how it works. Especially in the early days of the finance markets, stockbrokers, exchanges around the world, they used to be based upon little pieces of paper with signatures on them, and then that changed into technology, and that technology was very process driven. And a lot of technology that's released today is process driven. But as we're moving forward, as we're starting to understand that people are important to the business, then the technology you give them has to be an experience that they like to use, that adds value for them, because then it's easy to roll something out anew and change and everything else. So the experience you create with it is everything. Let's take another quote. Let's think about the team. Technology is best when it brings people together. Matt Mullenweg, all right, one of my favorite quotes from this guy, okay? People work together on an application. People work together on a new technology. They help each other, they train each other, and they make that technology rollout a success. So if we want to ensure high value in our Microsoft teams, then we need to consider the team product itself. And we also then need to consider the teams that it's going to be used for. And I'm sure we've heard all those horror stories about how people put MS Teams out there and people said, oh, I don't like using it, and they go back to their file shares and they don't see the benefits or the value. And that's part of what we're going to try and look at today, and look at some techniques on how we can make rolling out MS Teams a great experience for you as the people that have to build it, with all the stress of getting it out there and making it available, and also the users. So the experience that we create with this technology is everything to the business. How many of you seen your planning delivered like this? It's a standard Gantt chart. You can see all the tasks on the left hand side. This one's obviously for an Android application. Going out to the customer, finding out what they need, and then spending, in this particular case, 8 weeks building the plan. 8 weeks before the customer gets to see anything at all. Imagine you go to the business, you say, guys, we're going to roll out MS Teams, and you listen and listen for the cheer. The problem is that IT has got such a bad reputation for delivering stuff on time, and such a great reputation for losing our way, delays, etc., etc. And I know not everybody is like that, so I'm not accusing everybody listening to this to be in such a state. But even today, Office 365 adoption rollouts, they always seem to take longer as we start to try and fit it all together and realize it's bigger or more problems than we envisaged to start off with. And that's what we need to change. You cannot deliver value when it takes nearly 2 months to roll out an application to a desktop like MS Teams. Okay, there's a lot to get right, the governance, etc., etc. But when you do it this way, when you do it the old-fashioned way, it can take time, and the business doesn't see the value until the end. The risk, of course, is that when you get to the end, the business value that you based your project on has changed. So that's why we need Agile. This question comes up all the time when I do this presentation, when I talk to people about technology in terms of Office 365 applications, and then I talk about Agile. There's 2 reasons that you should consider. Agile is the way. There's a huge number of organizations that are changing the way they work, especially in the financial industry and any of the other heavily regulated industries. They are seeing the benefits. Is I believe we can get the product and the applications out to the audience quicker, and that could well be MS Teams in this case, but it could be Flow, it could be Stream, it could be any of the applications as you release them. If I was doing this session live, I would ask you to raise your hands and ask, is your organization looking at Agile? And every single time I get 80% of the audience raising their hands. So I expect 80% of the people listening to this are talking or thinking or working in an organization that is considering Agile. The real question is why? Everybody's doing it. Everybody is seeing the advantage of Agile. It's not new. It's been around for 20 odd years. It was developed for helping the software industry develop their software quicker, and it needs some iteration and change to work in a business perspective, but the basic concepts are the same. Small teams, in this case ING Bank, Spotify, they use the word tribe to describe their teams, and each team has a tribe lead, agile coach. That's the way that the banks are setting themselves up. But other industries, manufacturing industries and production industries, are doing the same. The objective is very simple. You have a small team of highly skilled people that are given a specific task that they take ownership of. So that squad owns everything that they need to do. They're not led by a manager, they're not led by a team lead. That squad is just taking responsibility for delivering it. You'll get this slide set, and there's 2 or 3 links on this slide here, all underlined, that'll give you a great background on Agile, the advantages, why people are making the change. Let me try and explain how I think an Agile methodology can help you increase the value of MS Teams, because that's the point. And even if you're not Agile today, you can go back to your office, talk to your boss and say, hey, I would like to work closer with the business in an Agile way, if that's the keywords that you need to use, in an Agile way, such that we can roll out our applications quicker and keep developing the value in those applications for the business. So let's look at some of those keywords we need to think about in Agile and then apply them to our problem of adopting and improving and delivering a valuable Microsoft Teams system. Those words are iterative, sprint, and Scrum. I'm sure you've heard of all of these things, and I'm sure you've heard things like Scrum. That's for software development. We don't need to use that in our business and in our organization, and there's probably a certain amount of logic in that. Let's just very briefly look at those words, and then we'll apply them in our Microsoft Teams rollout. Iterative. It basically means that we do a little bit, we stop, we review, and then we move on. At the end of each of those sections, we review with the business to make sure it's still aligned with where they see it going, and also get some feedback. Find out whether we're doing it right. We're giving them something that they can see some value in. The next one is sprint, and the sprint is the name of that period of time where we do an iterative piece of work, where we build something and test it and review it and demonstrate it, get some feedback, and then we move on to the next sprint with a new set of iterative developments and builds and objectives. Scrum, well, I told you that the Scrum team own these iterative developments in these sprints, and the Scrum is how we keep track on who's doing what and making sure that all of the deliverables within that sprint are delivered. But we're not going to focus too much on Scrum today, because this is about getting value into MS Teams. And so we're going to look at how the iterative methodology and how the sprint time frame will allow us to do that and roll out MS Teams in the absolute best way possible. This is a big slide. It's from scrum.org, that part of the owners of the Scrum process. So that iterative, sprint and Scrum. The Scrum is basically right in the center. That's where the team is working to take on board all of the things that they need to be done. This iterative process, the sprint, is the whole picture that you see here. I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but I want to pick up on a couple of big blocks. The product backlog, we'll cover that towards the end of this presentation, but that is our list of things that we need to deliver. It's not tasks, it's descriptions of how MS Teams needs to be configured or built to deliver value for the business. This is then put into a small sprint backlog. So all the things we need to do in this iterative section, in this sprint, are then compiled into that sprint backlog. Then the Scrum team take on all of those things and they deliver them. And again, it's not a series of tasks. One of those things may well be a small description of how somebody would like their team to be configured, with the way that their channels need to be lined up, whether they need some private channels as well as some public channels inside that team within that MS sprint. It might be a certain kind of connector that needs to be added to a particular channel. All of these backlog items in that particular sprint backlog will then be handled by the team. At the end of that sprint period, the end of a daily scrum where we all get together and identify who's going to do what and whether something was done successfully or not, we have a review. And that review will take part of demos. It'll show the team site built with those channels described as the business asked for them, with the security and the private channels enabled. And we would demonstrate it to the team, and we would say to the business with the team, hey guys, is this what you wanted? That's what you had asked for 2 weeks ago. Is that what you wanted? They would go, yeah, thank you very much. That's exactly what I wanted. So then they'll be happy. And then they might say, we could do with an extra channel. And you go, no problem. We'll add it into this sprint as something that needs to be added to this channel. And that's the simple process. You don't have to spend weeks developing a long drawn out project plan. You just think about the next 2 weeks. Obviously, there's a whole bunch of other processes where we step back and we look at the bigger project. But in terms of focus for the team, for the work that needs to be done, it's a very small, iterative, repeatable process in sprints handled by the delivery team. I've been talking about the waterfall as that Gantt chart, and I've been talking about the Agile way. There's some statistics here that the waterfall way has problems. 80% of project management don't know how their project aligns with the company's strategy. And that's because the strategy changes, but the projects don't change. And so a long project could well then deliver something that's no longer in strategy, which means the company is not agile. Get it? You need to be agile to make sure your resources are being used on the most important things for the organization. And when you have a long waterfall project with people tied into it, then they can't be put into something that is more important. How many times has somebody said, hey, we need to finish that project off, even though you know you're not going to use the output, but you don't really want to throw away the 3 months, 4 months, 5 months investment in that time. It's kind of better to have something working that you might use later than have something only half finished that you will forget to finish later. In the waterfall way, because they're kind of large and they're so well structured, communicating and working with senior managers, with CEOs, even middle managers is difficult. And there's large numbers of projects that have those problems. The Agile way is very much different. Communication is easy because everything's a 2-week sprint. So you're able to meet the business and review what you've been asked to build and what they expect to build. And if happens, more often than we'd all like to admit, you're building something that isn't quite aligned to what they need, then hey, we can change it in the next sprint. So a lot of projects are going the Agile way. You can see there's a number here, 76% of business just in Netherlands and Belgium expect to be Agile projects. Agile methodology enjoys a greater chance of success. And the reason it stands that chance is simply because it is reviewed more often with the business, and the business, more often than not, are actually paying for these projects. It's their budget that's been migrated to the IT team to roll out or to make that change or to develop that program. So let's move on to something that you may or you may not have heard of before. Kano is a Japanese methodology for measuring value and satisfaction based upon the functionality of something that's being built or something that's being developed. In effect, we're going to create a kind of magic square, you know, these kinds of things that Office 365 is always in the top right-hand quadrant. But on the vertical scale, we have satisfaction. At the bottom, I'm completely dissatisfied. In the middle, I'm kind of neutral. And at the top, I have satisfaction, high levels of satisfaction. Now, on the horizontal, we have features. Less features on the left-hand side and more features on the right-hand side. And somewhere in the middle, we have enough features to prove that this works, but maybe not adding as much value. What Kano does is it measures a point where it has just the right amount of features to create some satisfaction. But as we add the right features, then we get a high valuable return on the product. And so by the time it's finished, it looks something like this. In the left-hand bottom quadrant, we have low functionality and low value. In the top right-hand side, we have full functionality and high value. So when we start a new product, what we're aiming to do really at the start of a project, start of a deliverable, is to hit the cross in the center. In the center, we have not unhappy customers, they're neutral, with enough features to show something works. And this is called the MVP. Where the two lines join, we have the MVP, the minimal value proposition. So the minimum we can create that will allow the product to be used. And the reason that we want to get to that point is so that the business can tell us how to develop it further, what other functionality they want to add to this. Now, Microsoft do this all the time with the user voice. So they release a new product. If you probably remember when they released Forms, it could just about ask a question and answer a question, and you could just about get the results. And that was it. And then people suggested how it could be improved. The users, in our case, you and me probably, at a technical level, decided that, hey, forms.uservoice.com, can you please make it do X and can you please add Y? Microsoft wait for 20% of the user base to say, can we all agree with this? And then when they agree with it, they put it into their development plans. And that's what we want to be able to do with our business within MS Teams. So there's our sweet spot. That's the gift. That's the present. That's when we become happy customers in that top right-hand quadrant. Then we do a release. And our release is going to take us to a middle point, to that neutral point. And then we do more iterations. And those iterations will put us right squarely in the full functionality, high value place. Now, it may not be the full functionality of the application. You know what MS Teams is like. There's hundreds and hundreds, possibly even 1,000 by the time we're finished with all these different combinations of containers and connectors and all that kind of stuff. There's lots of combinations. We want to choose the combination that the business needs to get best value. And to do that, we have to ask the business. So let's take a look at this Kano map in real life. You can see here those idea of iterative builds. Instead of a waterfall Gantt chart, we have a number of iterations. Each of these iterations takes information coming in from our sprint backlog. We go round in circles doing it, checking it, quality assurance it. At the end of the sprint, we have a review session and we've delivered a portion of the work. We then present that to the business, because if you can remember Matt Mullenweg's quote at the beginning, technology is best when it brings people together. And we are bringing people together, our IT, configuration, development team, plus the business, to review what we've delivered so far. And it doesn't need to be long into the project. When we've done that, we then decide where to go next. So what we end up with here is our Kano square, okay, for our first release. And we've done part of the work and part of the iteration that we develop. And then we have some choices. The business may turn around and say, it'd be really good if we can expand it and create teams ourselves. And we go, okay, we'll put that in our list, and we develop it or configure it or set up the permissioning so that users can develop and build their teams themselves. And then they choose a direction. And then we get on to the first update. And the update is based upon the direction chosen. And we get to a point at the end of that sprint where we demonstrate what we've done so far. And then the business come back and they say, yes, continue on, please. Or they may say, actually, we'd like to change it and add this extra functionality. Cool. Then we release another update. And eventually we work our way into the I-value area of our Kano space that the business has directed us into. We're adding value. Not only are we just adding value, we're adding the best business value, because we've brought the people together with the technology and asked them what they needed. We know the process: iterative, sprint, and scrum. But we're going to adopt easier by delivering business value. That's what we're trying to do, is to deliver business value. So how do we actually do that? Let's have a quick look at this. We want to deliver business value. We have strategies and directions which we will prepare for, but we're going to focus on that value. So how do we do this? We need to consider our process. We need to be adaptable. We need to support the technology. We're the experts in that. The business are not the experts in that, but we can provide that technology to the business and find out how they best want to use it. We need the subject matter experts. If you're in manufacturing, you probably need somebody that knows manufacturing. If you're in banking, you need to speak with people that know banking and the finance systems and the regulations. If you're in recruitment, you need to understand somebody that needs people and understands the strategy of the business. These are our specialists, and they're the people that run the teams, and that the teams deliver things, and we're providing them with a tool to collaborate better. But that collaboration needs to work for them. We take those subject matter experts, we add them into the process of supporting and adapting the technologies that we can bring to the table. And we put in our flexible business architecture. There are 40 different configurations that we can do to Microsoft Teams, and that's growing on a regular basis, especially if we consider putting in voice switching and telephone numbers, as well as remote meeting software, as well as teams, private channels in those teams, public channels in those teams, and add in the wonderful development opportunities that MS Team delivers. We have a flexible business architecture mixed in with the people from the business, those subject matter experts, added in to a bit of process and innovation and us understanding how we need. It provides, where all of that overlaps, business value. We're not interested in having the best Office 365 service the world has ever seen. We are interested in having the most suitable Office 365 structure that the business needs to meet its strategic aims. And that's usually a combination of people, processes, and the platforms to run them. We talked about iteration, we talked about sprints, and we've talked about Scrum. What about the people around all of this? Well, they're basically three roles that we need to think about. One is the delivery team. I've mentioned this before. Okay, we are a delivery team We are the technicians. We know what technically is sound and how best to do something. The business do not know that. As technicians, we know that a managed metadata field applied to a document library in the correct way will help their search, their viewing, the tracking of that content, plus a whole bunch of stuff about retention that we're not going to deal with today. But we have no idea what terms needs to go into that term set. We have no idea what kind of workflows need to be applied to that content that maybe the term set can kick off. But we are the delivery team. We know how to configure. We understand that technology. Somebody has to manage this in some way. Well, the team actually manage themselves. One of the big advantage of Agile is they're self-managed. But if there's a problem or unplanned work, the team can get stuck and not get things delivered on time. So we have a Scrum Master. He's the owner of the process. He's not actually the leader of the team. That is so easy to fall into that trap. But the Scrum Master is also the person that liaises with all the other people. He sets up the review meetings with the business. He will go and find out why the network team have not delivered your network ports on the firewall if something doesn't work when you turn on the service. The Scrum Master, key role. And the product owner, the most important role of them all. Now, we're not going to break all these roles down. We don't have time. We only have 45 minutes. But the product owner sets priority. They are in the middle. They are the business on one side and they have the IT strategy on the other. And they identify what the delivery team needs to deliver in that sprint and in that iteration. And working together, these three roles make sure that the most important things get done first, and the business, because they get items reviewed all the time, make sure that everything gets delivered correctly and it does what it says on the cover. We're delivering business value in MS Teams. We need people to monitor and manage their own particular area. The delivery team do not want to get stuck into working out what is more important and talking to the business all the time. They need to deliver, and that's what the product owner does. The product owner sets the priority for the work based upon what will deliver the highest value, based upon what the business is telling them they need. The Scrum Master makes sure that the delivery team can deliver and that they are focused on what needs to be done. So there are those three roles that need to be done. And again, I mentioned video before from Spotify. That Spotify video is on YouTube. Go find it. Just do a search for Spotify squads and tribes. It's 2 15-minute videos and it works really, really, really well. All right, tells you exactly how they take new items and development and how the team keeps focused on what is value in the product. When we looked earlier at the iterative process, we started off with a product backlog on the left hand side, and on the right hand side we ended up with a review of the work that we were doing. Let's take a quick look at that product backlog. Basically, that product backlog is a list of prioritized work. It is comments and ideas from the business, and not all the business, by the way. If, for example, we want to roll out a new technical feature, say we wanted to do connections to an internal database from our MS Teams, then there would be a lot of backlog items that are being delivered for us as technical solutions. But as we're focused on business value, in that product backlog catalog, there would be requests for functionality from the business. We call them features. So in that backlog, the product owner would write in there the work that needs to be done based upon the feedback from the business. And they're written down as user stories. And there's a couple of examples on these slides here. They're basically descriptions of who the owner of the story is, or what their role is, what it is they need to do, and why it's important. So I'm going to read one of these word for word. As an Agile user, I want to create a shared space where we can share documents and links to our key functionality. prioritizing both recent documents and the most common links. That's what they want to do. It's not about what products they use. We don't care what products we use. We just need to choose the best product as the delivery team so that we can demonstrate that within HR, they're able to click a button, create a space where they can upload documents for a particular project or a particular functionality. That's it. That's what the user story is. There's another one here for the legal team where they want to do searchable things. It's describing what they need. And we have those in our product backlog. But of course, the important thing before the delivery team work on these, work out what needs to be done, somebody needs to say which of these items needs to be done, which one gets done first, and which one is the most important. And that's where the product owner comes in. We have the backlog, and we have the backlog items we need to do in this particular sprint. And they've been selected for that sprint based upon getting business value. So not only do we do prioritization that basically says what do we need to do, we only have a certain amount of things that can be done by the delivery team. And so we look at a few things. Here's a little formula on this slide. We can consider for each item how many users it's affecting, how often they will use this new feature that we're going to build, and how much time it will be saved, and then do a formula. So we have a business value of 2 items here. One's got a business value of 45, one's got a business value of 65. So we obviously do the one that's going to deliver most value. That's what we're trying to do. In MS Teams, we want it to create business value. So that formula about how much time is saved by how many people and how often gives us a figure that we can then work out. And there's a number of formulas around that we can use to do this, but as long as you use the same formula for a longer period of time, then you will end up with relative items and relative business value, which is great. So when you have too many items to do in a sprint, then you can choose the ones that have the highest business value. And the ones that are left behind, they will get considered next sprint, back on the backlog by the product owner as and when they need to be done. As it becomes more urgent to do something, their value increases, so naturally they rise to the top. If something never needs to be done, the value is low and it'll never get done. Basically means that all those things that you think need doing that never add any business value, so hey, they just don't get done, and we can ignore them and move on to the more important things. This presentation was ensuring high value MS Teams to the business. And I said I would turn you into rock stars. And this is how we do it. At the end of each sprint, we're going to review the work we've done. We're going to bring the teams in that we're building it for. And we're going to say, hey, this is what we've built so far. You can actually have it and use it now if it works for you. And the team will come back and say, actually, that's exactly what we need. Thank you very much. Goodbye. And we never see them again until they want something improved. Or they may turn around and say, we've played with this a little bit. We think we're going to need to have an extra date field added here. And maybe we would like to have some way of having an alert when X happens to this particular document or objective. And you can then make a choice. You can get a description immediately of what they need, make sure you understand it, review everything you've delivered, review what needs to be done, and get on and build it in the next sprint. Actually, you would make an assessment as to whether it's important enough for the next sprint. This is how we can ensure that our MS teams are delivering value. We can ensure that it's done quickly. We can ensure that we don't have to wait till the end of a waterfall project to do it. We don't collect a bunch of requirements early on and try and do every one of those requirements. Small iterative steps with a sprint review at the end. This is the important bit. This is the bit that validates everything we're trying to do in the business we're trying to add to Office 365. So where do we fit in all this together when it comes to adoption? Relatively speaking, MS Teams is quite easy to enable, turn on and roll out. The hard bit is getting it right. The hard bit is making sure the governance is in place so that people don't just keep creating a bunch of teams that stay there forever and never move. But how does it make adoption easier? All of the things that we've been talking about. Well, it's fairly simple as this really. If I need a new car and I walk into the first garage that I see, I point to the first blue car that I see, I pay for it and drive away, then I have a car and it's done. But am I happy? Is it providing value? It might be the right price. Hey, it's a little Mini, it costs me 20 grand, but there's 7 people in my family. Is it suitable? Is it adding value when I have to do 2 school runs every day? So when we talk about adoption, we want to make sure that what we're building is fit for purpose. So what we've talked about so far in this session enable us to do that. Kano means that we deliver the MS team solution that the business expects, that they need, that they can modify, they can change. We review it, we test it. Improvement is actually built into the whole process. It's continually improved because the business get into the habit of working closer with IT. Responsibility is with the people that tell you what to do, which is the business. They agree those user stories. As an end user, I want to do this and this, please. And then they can't change their mind. They will change their